Welcome to the Remote Teacher Podcast. We're excited to have you here. I'm Hakea Hustler, an experienced regional, rural and remote teacher, author of children's, middle and YA books and co-creator of the Facebook group Teachers in Remote Communities Past, Present and Future, along with Carl Merrison and Lynette Gordon, and the co-owner of website The Remote Teacher. The Remote Teacher podcast and all our support platforms come from a passion to improve the experience of remote teachers and in turn create positive outcomes for our remote students and communities. You can find out more about us on www.theremoteteacher.com.au, over on our Facebook group, Teachers in Remote Communities Past, Present and Future, and of course by listening to this podcast. Now remember, you can also download these podcasts so you don't need internet access and you can listen to them wherever you need, including on your long drives out to your remote and rural communities. Please remember to like us on Facebook, on Instagram, and by signing up to our email list. And before I introduce our guest for today, it's important to acknowledge that the discussions that we have here are the opinion of the guest and myself alone and do not represent anyone, including Department of Education or any particular organisation, unless, of course, they've come on stating that they're representing that organisation. It's also important to consider First Nation peoples, communities, students and families are all diverse and unique, and what works for our guest and myself may or may not work for you, your students, your families, your communities and your schools. So take what you need, leave what you don't, sit back and enjoy. Let's begin. I'm excited to welcome Scott Wilson, a Gadgerrong and Gooniyandi man from Kimberley in Western Australia. Before we begin our discussions, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands we meet today. I'm on the country of the Bundjalung people in northern New South Wales, and Scott's over on the country of Yawuru people. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people listening along with our podcast today. So, Scott, you've been everywhere and done lots of things. Can you give a little bit of background about yourself?
Where do I start, really? So back in the dreaming, so with my family, I guess for the context of who I am, I'd like to just share more or less the kind of fact that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, and everything that I have had the privilege and blessing and appreciation of being able to do has been because of a lot of my elders, my mom and dad, and all the people that came before me. And so I am a Merong, Gadgerrong. I say Merong Gadgerrong because Merong is the only language we have left that's connected to Gadgerrong in the Kununurra area. But my Dawang along Gadgerrong is connected to the coast called Waterbang. And we say Dawang is a subgroup within that language group. So all the people, they speak that language there, but then they're all in subgroups that are based on specific areas geographically around where those languages are spoken. So Gooniyandi, and I often speak because it is in my culture and from Gooniyandi culture is about the matriarchy, and it all comes and follows the line of my mom and my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandmother, which I like to share the story that just recently in the passing year, I've gone back home and gone back to where my great-grandmother was born, which was called Mungaringi, which was, a place called, so it's called Painted Rock. And there in a cave, my great-great-grandmother was born. And not so far from that place, there was a tree where my grandmother was born. I like to share that because of, I guess, the stolen generation. My mum was born in a native hospital on Yawuru country, and that was the closest hospital to Lagrange missionaries, where my mum grew up under the tail end of the stolen generation. But my grandmother was taken from where Gina Reinhardt currently owns, Fossil Down Station, all the way over 600 kilometers away to Lagrange missionaries with the Gadgerrong people in Bijarenga. And that's where we have a lot of that awesome connection with the people there. And that's where the first native hospital was, in Broome, where my mum was born. And so I'm the first in my, I guess, line. Well, I guess if you talk about matriarchy, my sister was born in the first hospital that isn't segregated, from non-Indigenous peoples. So it's only, if you look at it, only 3 generations where, we were living, born in a cave to now here where we are today. And so I'd like to share that just so that we understand the context of how close we are, to the beginnings of this country in regards to its colonial history. But then it goes beyond that in terms of our First Nations, connection, which has spans across, 60,000 years plus, and so I'm very proud of that. And the context of that is what empowers me. And so, yeah. So in the nutshell, because of that history, it allowed me to go to boarding school and really take on that empowerment to go and do things I never seen in my environment. And I always had this thing about I didn't want people to stereotype me as as this black fella that or put me under the kind of stereotypes that the world kind of looked at First Nations peoples. And so I wanted to go out and set my sight on dismantling those stereotypes. And so that started with boarding school. And so I went to boarding school and took on every opportunity I can, and tried to expand in terms of my education, but then while simultaneously grappling with intergenerational trauma and even just the vocabulary around how do we talk about it, because I never really knew the context of that. But growing up and being away and traveling even to third world countries, it really allowed me to kind of go and explore that, because we were exploring in history and in other kind of subjects the post policies and traumas of third world countries outside of our country. Yet we have that history here. And so I went to Vietnam, Cambodia, spent a few weeks there fundraising, taking things to Vietnam, Cambodia when I was 15. And I was introduced to this kind of colonial history of other third world countries, and also post policies like Pol Pot's in Cambodia and the killing fields and the Khmer Rouge, all those kind of stuff that span into the Viet Cong with Vietnam, and just seeing the trauma that is still exposed to a lot of the young people there. Provided this like really unique experience for me to be like, wow, I don't have any idea what my history is like here in Australia as First Nations peoples, and even just as Australians, and so that just having that awareness and consciousness, and that all came, and I share this with a lot of people, is from talking, just hearing stories from my elders, from my mom and dad, and them growing up and them really sharing the history of their experiences with stolen generation and those kind of things. And my dad even was at one point removed from family, and I never really asked him about it and talked about it, but it wasn't at the kind of under the scope of stolen generation, but it was while those things were still occurring in a lot of remote areas after it was abolished, that policy. But it was still, because we're such a large landmass, so, a lot of communities that were still running under these post policies that still impacted our young people beyond the stage of which it was supposed to be abolished. And so because of that, it just provided me this means of understanding that I need to do this, disregarding shame, the shame barriers that I still face. And I think that does come from a lot of that identity and those barriers that come with intergenerational trauma. But that had that awareness of it and the context behind it allowed me to be able to start to communicate, ask questions, and even not ask questions to people, but ask questions to myself at an individual level, which leads into my own self-care and my own journey of my own social emotional well-being. And so that took me on this huge journey from boarding school to university, and I studied in various places, from UWA with anthropology, then over to South America in Chile, where I went and spent a few months in Valparaiso University, studying the Mapuche and looking at their shamanism and also their history of effects of colonization, those kind of things. But it really seen a lot of similarities to our First Nations culture here, and there wasn't much separation in regards to things that they faced. It was only time. They faced it much earlier than we did. And there's so much to learn that I found from our First Nations brothers and sisters in America and other countries that were colonized earlier, to understand where we are today and how we can actually improve and get better, instead of doing their mistakes and waiting that large period of time to actually see actual positive outcomes. And so, went from there, then really looked at search for, in terms of employment, those kind of things, and how I can support my people. And one of the things was coming back home. And that's where I implemented and supported the implementation of the early childhood program, our mob as first educators programs, which I was lucky enough to join. Janelle Kendi at St. Mary's Primary School, supporting them in developing that and what that was. And I became a practitioner in Abecedarian Australia, early childhood learning, to be a part of that. And now the students and kids are wearing my logo that I created for the program, and the uniform. And my mum was a teacher there, and they graduated all these deadly young kids into primary school through that program. So it's so good to come back and be able to do that and speak to the people and community and do those kind of stuff. And so I've been trying to go everywhere, do whatever I can, from OSH, like after school programs, to all these stuff, to now, with my own companies that I'm been developing over the last 3 years, in film, television, in publications, and in now green energy. And so there's a lot of stuff there in regards to how I can create capitalism to support socialism, basically. And that's one of the biggest kind of goals I've always had, is using capitalism to fund socialist outcomes.
You've got so
in
many
a
different
nutshell.
in a nutshell, so many different passions drawing you so many different ways, and trying to do so much as well. That's the juggle. Hey? You went all the way from the Our Mob First program and spent a bit of time working with the Year 13 and the Headspace as a mental health ambassador as well. So you went from one end of the spectrum to the complete other.
Well, a lot of it is I feel like at a point I was like Forrest Gump. I was like kind of going to different places. The world was taking me all these different areas, but I kind of had that purpose of what I wanted to do, or really was like uncovering it. I knew that it was is all about our people, and that passion to support however I can in that journey of positive outcomes, or even just the idea of utopia. And so it led me to a lot of different places, and especially advocate for youth mental health in Australia, Year 13, and traveling across New South Wales, we toured, talking to so much schools and young people, and it's just sharing our passion, and even sharing stuff that hadn't been created yet, but in the process of going through it all, it manifested and was created. And so it's a lot of chance, a lot of risk. And I always think that it's risky, everything's risky. To go drive to the shop, it's risky. And I think if you look at it, it's risky not to try, just as much as it is risky to try. And so
to go back and then work our way out to your big ideas and your big projects that you're working on. But for the listeners who are remote teachers, often not First Nations people, so often non-Indigenous, and they're going out into schools at the moment, and they're working with First Nations young people in early education all the way through. What are your learnings or your takeaways or your hints for people based on your knowledge through your First Educators program and your Year 13? What things should we be thinking about?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things is equipping ourselves. I think as the educators, I feel like there is that third space between a young person coming together with a teacher, and when you meet together, being actually ready for that.
Yes.
Because unfortunately, why our Mob as First Educators program was created as a pre-kindy program is because, as intergenerational trauma and all these kind of things affect the cognitive development of a lot of our young kids, indigenous kids that are coming through, and we're finding that we're not at the same stage entering school as as non-indigenous kids. And so to start that learning and even bringing our parents on board with that, and I think the education journey is often well, I always saw it as like okay, you go and babysit my kids for this time, you teach them, you think, but education doesn't stop after school, or start at 9 in the morning and then ends at 2:30, and then you keep, and so our Mobbers First Educators program was actually involving the parents to come in to understand the cognitive development through conversational learning, through enriched caregiving, what that looks like, learning games, those kind of stuff, that is so important, so that the primary educator of our kids aren't the teachers. The primary educators are our parents, our mums and dads. And the teachers take on a lot of that responsibility. And there is so much so much that we put on our teachers, in terms of that educating of our students. And I think coming into it with an equipped mind, not at a theoretical level, but the practical nature of working with young people, and I think for me, entering in to school for the first time was actually with pre-primary students. And that was all about structure and making sure that, our young kids had the structure and learning that understanding of, them being able to learn. Because obviously in primary school, it is more so equipping them, or even us having the understanding that they're not ready in that stage to actually be learning these things. But if we can get them ready to actually sit down and absorb this kind of information. But there's so much factors that I feel like when I was there that I was not equipped for. And one of the things that's why I want to share with you guys is the context of a lot of these students. And I bring context up because context is like one of my key things to everything when it comes to even being introduced to another area or another society, another environment, all those kind of things to go in, and we learn the context along the way. But imagine if we had information that allow us to be equipped to, with the context before we get there, because I think because that will allow us how we communicate with a lot of our young people, communicate to anyone really, is understanding that context. And then you avoid the
mistakes along the way.
The mistakes, you can avoid them, and there are
and you step in there on this this foot where you've got this strength, where you're coming in and not wasting time per se, making the mistakes or doing the learning. You're ready to go and you're supporting your students from day one rather than
absolutely. And that comes with a lot of patience, and there's one of the biggest things that I've found is it's going to be easy to do the easy thing. And I feel like, so there's this quote that I share, and it applies to pretty much everything, is that if you do what is easy, life will be hard. But if you do what is hard now, life will get easier. And you can see that with Coach Carter, and there's a lot of films out there that you can watch and really see like the span of a year. Even Lean on Me. If you watch Lean on Me with Morgan Freeman, you will understand that if you do what is hard now, life will get easier. And I found that at primary school is that we kind of looked at it as this deficit thinking model around, okay, if a child is doing something bad, actually, no, okay, it's an Aboriginal child, okay, yeah, we know that, they might be suffering under, well, FASD or impacted by all these different things. And that's the context of understanding that child. Okay, they come from a home that maybe have like trauma from that experience and those kind of things. And having that context is very good, but it's good to the point where we can't deficit thinking, like put in that deficit thinking model. Because let's just say, for example, a young boy or a young girl heading into primary school, and every time something happens because of, their kind of, let's just say, in terms of where they're at, in terms of their cognitive development, they can't read. And so they're acting up because of the kids around them can read. And they're trying to figure out, oh, why can't I read? Or I am stupid. And the kids are perpetuating that by bullying and those kind of stuff. And now they're acting up. It's easy to go, okay, every time he does something bad, we're going to go and take him out and kick footy with him. or we're going to do these things. But what we're not realizing we're doing is setting up a deficit model of negative behaviors that are going to have to be corrected going into their higher levels of learning. So now a student at primary school or in those early years will think, okay, if I do something bad, I'm actually going to get rewarded and I'm going to go outside, get some time alone, kick the footy and do what I want.
Yes.
And now when we look at year 3, year 4, year 5, and they're acting up, and now it's even harder to correct it because they're older, when we have to start thinking about, oh, is this going to impact their learning at year 1? And then when we're looking at year 1, is this going to impact their learning at year 2 level? And start to look at all these different, or even ask these questions, okay, how can we prepare them at pre-primary for year 1? And what does that look like? Or even in their learning journey, and take it at a very individual level, because we're going to have a lot of students that, can't comprehend the same way another student can. And they're all on that educational journey. And so that context and patience comes into effect, because now you're looking at, okay, they might not be at that level, so we have to cater it. We must start to look at, okay, maybe they are affected by FASD. What does that look like? And that takes, I guess, educators' role and expands on it, because now you're a psychologist. You're meant to be a psychologist and those kind of things, because I guess in remote communities, you don't have access to, an OT, or any of these mob that come in, or you're on a waiting list and those kind of things. So really, the university does not prepare you for the multiple roles that you have to take on when you're out in remote communities. There is a standardization. If you go to a private school, you are getting paid to be that role. You won't have to deal with that kind of stuff because of how that is set up. And universities and those kind of teaching models set you up for the perfect, ideal workplace. Where remote areas, it's not ideal. And there's going to be a lot of things that come up, like even things get broken, things happen, and it's how do you adjust to that, adapt to that, and not take it as a way of shifting your perspective on a young person, but how do you shape it to actually be like, okay, I realize that doing it this way didn't work, so we're going to try this other way. It might be like Thomas Edison. To create the light bulb, you have to try, 999 different ways to do it, but eventually you're going to get to that point. And so that's the difference between, I guess, doing it easy, where it can be easy. And my AIO or my Aboriginal assistant, go take them out, do this. But that taking away, perpetuates this even segregation, even though we don't know, and it just perpetuates all these different models of thinking, even for the young non-Indigenous students. And that's what I always find, is that if we treat our Indigenous students in a certain way, it comes back for the younger kids seeing that as well. And we have to just be aware and conscious of the kind of decisions we make, and that falls from deficit thinking. And because I did a little,
so much to kind of bounce off, explore in a lot more depth, and pick apart with everything you've said there. There's so much in that for people to reflect on and think about as well.
It's it's great. So I just share this example just so that to know the reality of it, is that I went through, when I was going through school, bouncing from Red Hill. I went to school there for a little while, Gibb River, Derby, and a few other places. But there's three mates. So there's 4 of us. And for me, if I swore or did anything like that, I was sent to the principal office. I was sent there, and it was corrected very straight away. The other 3 boys, if they swore, they'd be like, "Oh, sorry, can you not swear? This is your first strike. Don't swear." All of them had that same thing. If I did something bad before a football match, I couldn't play that football match. But those 3 boys did. We're all Aboriginal. Those 3 boys, okay, it's all right. He's right. He's going through stuff at home and this kind of stuff. Those 3 boys end up going to prison and thing. And so it starts at a very young age in terms of how we're setting up our young people And it's even the kind of systems of that we're setting our young people up to go into, and the discipline needs to be done and they said undisciplined boys become undisciplined men. And so it starts at school, and a lot of that thinking comes from that deficit. And I keep going back to that deficit because that really, looking back, affected me in terms of I was treated differently. I don't know if it was like because my skin was lighter or what it was, um, to the boys that who were considered our darker skin, and those kind of things.
Or
And so
level of family support or whatever people
yeah,
were
those kind of
perceiving from
stuff.
you and them. Yeah.
Yeah, at
Yeah.
that point in time. And so, and you could see the pathway and you could track the trajectory of a young person's life based on, whether it's discipline, all these foundational stuff that leads to, because we're fighting now, it's recidivism, in prison, incarceration rates for not only men, but women as well.
Yeah.
And it starts at a very young age for discipline, like if you watch Coach Carter, Lean on Me, you see the positive outcomes of disciplinary action with context. And so if there is something to people to watch, go and watch Lean on Me and Coach Carter.
You've got me thinking and reflecting back so much about the way that I've worked with students and, the mistakes and learnings that I've made along the way. But what you're talking about with the First Educators program is empowering parents and community-led, because you were organising it and bringing it up from the ground roots. And you're talking about the big picture, figuring out and dreaming up pathways for these young people from early days. What will happen if I treat this child this way and do this that way? What's the next impact in the next year? And it also makes me think about the structures that we then put on inside the classroom, because I have definitely been guilty. In fact, I've been talking with other people on the podcast about like how partial attendance plans is actually great because they experience success in the morning and then they go home or, know, when they're ready. But what you're talking about, this deficit model and how we create these structures inside the classrooms and have these very high expectations of this is how I want you to work now, so that next year it gets better and next year it gets better and next year it gets better. So this is interesting to think about
it's definitely
and be flexible for as well, because I know that's sometimes that walkout with the AAO is exactly what's needed to protect the classroom or something, but still, what's the structure that I'm putting in place?
Oh, absolutely. And that's, I think, in psychology, you can see where habits are formed, whether it's positive or negative, and whether, especially at a young age, the structure of which you allow these things to be formed is repetitiveness. So if it is for a young person where it's like, oh, not every time, okay, it's nothing. And we're adults and we can start to be like, okay, these could be like, I hate to say it, but like, test mice of an understanding of, okay, for me to make sure that test subject gets the best out of life, these are the things that I want to make sure that the thing in this positive habit forming that I want to do. And you can do that in a positive way. And so, definitely, I've had to like carry children out that's broken windows, that have like thrown a chair, smashed a window, and I've had to pick up a child and take them to the office and those kind of things. There are like I guess levels to these things, in terms of categorizing when and what to do,
but the idea of that the hard stuff now is better for the child in the future, even reflecting like the hard stuff for you as a teacher, the hard stuff about thinking about the structures, the hard stuff about thinking about the IPPs, the hard stuff, the hard work that you have to do that's the best for the kid as well, not just it's hard for them to be in the classroom and to push themselves.
Absolutely.
Just a short break to share books and resources by Hakea Hustler and Carl Merrison. The Children's Book Council of Australia Book Week Honour Book in 2019, Black Cockatoo, is a middle reader short novella set on Jaru country. While short, there are many jumping off points to explore. Tracks of the Missing is a WA Premier Book Award, Daisy Atamara Award shortlisted YA suspense thriller. Set in outback Australia, it follows Declan Archer in his race to find a missing busload of students. My Deadly Boots is a First Nations picture book about confidence, identity, and connection. Carl and Hakea also have many more books out across the next few years, perfect for remote classrooms. Full teaching packs are available over on the website carlandhakea.com.au. We also create remote teacher resources, Getting to Know You, 2A Learning, NAIDOC, and much more over on our TPT store. So let's get back to this deadly interview. Then we've got the other end of the spectrum where these kids have succeeded, hopefully, or, are working their way through the education system and they pop out on the other end, and then there's year 13. What is that about?
Yeah, year 13, I think at its core is about supporting young people to take their passions and turn that into an actionable plan. And it's often, I think we get the misconception about year 13 is ready for it to be there on the way out, when actually we're starting at year 10, we're starting younger, because that conversation needs to happen at a very young age. I think primary school in its thing should be focused on that learning of, how to absorb information, right? Absorb information. And high school should be, how do I use that information to follow my passion or to find a passion? And I think that's where we're getting into that stage where high school is still being about learning how to absorb information, when it should be about how do I take this information now after learning that in primary school to find the best pathway for myself, and that's where in my head I've always like, oh, okay, year 13 is actually doing that. And it's supporting with that tool of saying, okay, we're looking at what you value, your interests, your goals. Through year 13, you have a tool that can actually cater for the experience of a young person at school. So like, instead of coming in and being like, oh, I'm not sure, and you get those questions like, oh, I don't know what I want to do. And so we have an expression of dip your toe in, because once you start dipping your toe into all these different things, you'll find, like, for me, I found that at year 12 that I didn't know I could drop, ATAR maths, and I was struggling, with ATAR maths, just because of, I guess, my foundational levels of learning around mathematics weren't there. And so I was, struggling, but to take that stress away, I finally knew, oh, I could drop it. And so that took off that stress. And the stress of like my whole schooling was all based on the ATAR marks and those kind of things. And so year 13 is trying to flip that narrative about schooling, and that, this should be a time for growing who you are, finding who you are, so that you understand where you want to go. And that's Earl Nightingale's kind of understanding of success. It's not the achievement at the end of the tunnel. It is knowing who you are, what you want to do, and heading in that direction, and that in itself is success. And so we want our kids through year 13 to really use the tool to find themselves, to dip a toe in, to find out what they hate, what they don't like, by experiencing those things. And then with that, with hopes that by year 12 or even after year 12, they can start to actually, kind of pinpoint where they want to go, whether that's university, whether that's gap year, whether that's, a trade, vocational education, training, those kind of things. And it's kind of dismantling this whole prestige around, for me to be academically excel, I have to go to university, which we've found that, through vocational education and training, we're having a lot less debts, a lot of things. And the statistics around it is just crazy. And I don't want to bore you guys with statistics, because I know that teachers would have so much data and statistics, but it is overwhelming. And we're heading into the next 10 years where there's such a skill shortage in a lot of things. And unfortunately, our young people are going to pay for it, because the propaganda around the skills shortage is based on what the economy needs and not what human needs, and what people want to do and what they enjoy doing and the passion around it. And that's why, as these things increase, so will we see the increase of, a lot of mental health issues, social emotional well-being issues. And so social emotional well-being is a core part of year 13, because it's looking at what do you enjoy? What are your interests? What are your values? Those kind of things, because those things have to go into figuring out what you want to do. Because if those things are separated, then you'll find yourself doing something you don't enjoy, and you'll find yourself not enjoying life. And we don't want our young people to do that. especially in remote areas where it is isolating already. There's a lack of opportunities and options. And so, how do we align them with an understanding that, oh, okay, you can do this stuff and it can be a gateway to having the skills to do whatever you want, starting business, free enterprise, capitalism, for socialism. And it's like, we can start growing businesses at home. And so year 13 really expands and opens your minds as a tool for teachers to introduce to their students, to really understand their students and what they want to do. Because I'm not putting up my hand in front of 40 students and saying that I'm going to be a nurse, but we found that a lot of boys were like, actually, I want to go into nursing. And so there is a lot of dismantling of taboos around what career pathways that you want to do, and that is an individual journey. And often the dominant culture at school is not positive; it's very negative on individuality. And I always have this quote about we are born unique individuals and we die copies. And a lot of that comes from the dominant culture in schools, which is, oh, that's not cool, this is cool, da 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 da, and it's perpetuated and controlled by the students. But we need to figure out a way of dismantling that by good youth leadership. So yeah, year 13 is all about that.
Oh, I can imagine lots of people listening are like, oh, I want to go sit down and chat with Scott. I want to learn more about these things.
Well, yeah.
It's powerful. They're really, really good thinking points for lots of people listening and jumping off points. So now people can go and explore year 13. People can learn about first educators programs and how to, implement that in their communities, community-led, inform people about what the options are. So Scott, this idea of pathways for young people after school and the planning that happens in school, it's a really interesting topic because I was talking with a principal of a school just before about how some kids become disengaged in remote communities because they don't see pathways for themselves. And I think it's really important for them to see like education as a pathway, that they can be the teachers and the principals. And, they can be the rangers and the policemen in community or whatever it is. But what do you think about that idea that this disengagement, because sometimes youth have no hope, they think that there's not much for them to do? How can we create these enterprises you were talking about in community, these pathways in or out of community?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think let's just kind of like for me, I had to go and search for a lot of those things in terms of this understanding. And I think Einstein kind of talks about it, and thing was about like, once you expand your mind, there's no going back, and so when you open up or even start to create neural pathways by just providing new information, you start building a new line of thinking in regards to who you are, where you want to go, and those kind of things. I did interviews with mob from Mullaja and in community there at Fitzroy Crossing, district high school there, and a lot of the students, and I wanted to do this just to see what their thinking was. And a lot of the kind of answers when I asked them what do they want to do, and they said, oh, I want to go into mines. A lot of them said, I want to work on the mines. There was only a few that was talking about, oh, I want to get into technology and do technology. And then if you set up the course of those, like let's just say an individual and where the information is coming from, like let's just say, oh, for that young person that says, oh, I want to go in mines, look at what their parents are doing, or if they're surrounded by those kind of things and where that information is coming from. And often you'll see that, oh, okay, they have maybe uncle or father or grandfather, someone on the mines that are getting money, and those kind of things that maybe providing for the family or doing like supporting the family, those kind of stuff. And it's more or less about that, not the actual job of like being on the mines. It is a form of, economy, income to actually support family and do those things. Because it's, I always found that it's not what you get that makes you happy, it's who you become and what you can do because you become more. And by sharing that joy, and you'll find that kind of value is within, young person say, I want to go into mines, because I know I'll get money, da 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 da. but deeper, how to go deeper into that. And so the information barriers around who's giving these young people the information is at the heart of year 13 as well. And going back to that is about understanding, the deeper inner understandings of your values, your interests, those kind of stuff, and how that is connected to a lot of things. And there's a lot of let's just say skills that are out there that you don't realize you have, and don't realize that okay, they're linked to these things. Like I would love for a young person to be like, oh, okay, I want to be an astronaut, and I think that's really like for a deficit thinking model, being like, actually, no, you can't. Reality, you can't. But in fact, it's not impossible. But that could lead to, learning and wanting to understand science and those kind of different things. So if you align these kind of things with practical ways of subjects and learning, which is, let's just say if someone wanted to be, chemical engineer, and they saw that on a TV show that they've been watching, oh, actually, that would be so cool to do that. How do we align those kind of career pathways with actual relevant, contextualized things at school? And so the job for you now is not saying, oh, sorry, we can't do that, but here's a veterinarian course. You can keep them in school. So the idea is retention, because you want to retain the young people. So why not do that on the basis of what they want to do and cater to the subjects? Let's just say, okay, that for astronauts, mathematics is right up there. So you need to learn mathematics to be an astronaut. Oh, really? I didn't know that. So now they're looking at mathematics not as something that we have to do, but as something that they need to get to actually achieve that pathway. And so it's a contextualization of a lot of these subjects, because at the moment, or when I went through, I had no context for why I was learning, SOHCAHTOA and, all these different algorithms and all this kind of stuff. And now I can actually go onto YouTube and like study them myself in my own time. And so there's so much, like if you have internet connection and those kind of things, even getting on there and
Let's
being
also
like,
creating that curiosity and giving them the skills so that they can be lifelong learners beyond, so that they, like you said, you can be like, oh yes, now I'll get on and explore.
Yeah. Oh,
and
100%.
And also that idea of if you can see it, you can be it. And that, giving them access to knowing what the pathways are. Okay, I want to be an astronaut. Here's the pathway to get to an astronaut. Or I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So I want to be something I'm not sure what it is. What are the options? And open my world to all the options.
Yeah, that's it. And and I think we've gone from that age where we have accessible technology and different things, and that goes out. It's like, how do we use those tools now to things? So like, I'll give you an example. Like for me, like we didn't have growing up, and a lot of teachers probably would know that we didn't have phones and accessible to all these things like how it is today. So imagination was at the core of it. And if you see a lot of people and see in my environment, I'm not surrounded by people giving me positive affirmations or positive motivations and those kind of things. I have to seek that. The default in my head, I feel, is negative. I will always go to the negative. I will always start thinking negatively. So I have to fill that space with positivity. So that's why I listen to a lot of stuff like Steve Harvey, even Les Brown, these kind of people that talk about the imagination is a preview of a coming attraction. So if you can see it up here, it can be created. You can you can't comprehend something in your mind unless it can be created on this right now in reality. And so a lot of the time it's about actually equipping young people with ways of thinking, or comprehending things, and even asking the question, like, we always ask questions to young people. It's like, okay, we need to get them to start asking questions, how does this work? How, or even start questioning things. And that's why if you look at civil rights movements and those kind of stuff, it all starts with university students. Why? Because they're getting taught how to question things, how to ask questions, to think, actually academically about all these different things, or think critically about things. And that shouldn't be happening then. That should be happening at younger, because then we can start to think, oh, okay, question, okay, why do I live like this? What is the context of which I am living like this? Okay, oh, it's because of all this stuff. okay, now I'm looking at emotional regulation. I'm looking at all these different things that we should be taught at school. And I think, if someone was knew how to emotionally regulate, then they could start to understand what decisions work, what how to make decisions, those decision-making tools. Then we can start to even formulate planning and planning for the rest of your lives, and even searching. And that's what I had to search. Like when I go to the gym, right? A lot of people say, "Oh, how do you know do this?" Because I sat in my room and I went on YouTube and I searched for how to do it. I've
Mm.
never studied film or anything in my life. But I sat, watched movies, I watched stuff, and I done it, and now I have my own film company.
Which leads
I have no
perfectly
idea.
which leads
Yeah,
perfectly into the next thing. I'm really curious. So all this stuff that you're saying is really powerful and has people thinking and sparking ideas.
hopefully.
You run your film, you write books, you're an author and comic books. So if people want to
Yeah.
know more, they definitely have to visit your websites. But you also do author talks. Do you do professional development and discussions with teachers? Do you go in and work on that level as well?
Yeah, oh, that's where I would love to go into. I kind of want to move away from talking to kids
Sure.
and kind of move into that space of really critically
Right.
thinking and even just asking the questions and those kind of stuff, or
Mm.
even digging deep into it. Um, and even expanding on my own learnings and those kind of stuff. And because I've been listening to a lot of academic talks lately, and it's like even providing whatever I can just to get people thinking. It's not to like I hate
You've
the
got me thinking. So I've
yeah
been
yeah
teaching for
yeah
over 10 years. I've been remote for many. And I'm like, oh, right. Oh, yeah, that's great to
yeah
know about and think about.
yeah.
So, yeah,
No,
teachers
I'm
can
glad. Yeah.
can reach out for you to deliver PD then.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. So with fish, so I'm moving to Perth very soon, and I'm going to be doing some stuff with them as well. So Foundation for Indigenous Sustainable Health, which is down in Perth. Definitely check out their website. They're doing such brilliant stuff everywhere, and a publishing house, and have a full-on like and social enterprise with First Nations owned products, those kind
Storefront,
of
yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. But other thing is, yeah, actually having those kind of conversations and delivering anything that, whether it's a Q&A, whether it's anything like that, I'm happy to,
Brilliant.
yeah, to do and just to
And I
yarn and
also
discuss.
think, I also think even though you're moving away from working with children so much, you as a role model, as a guest speaker role model, and for children to know, read your books in classrooms and see, hey, he did it, I can do it too, or hear your story and hear the way
Yeah,
you've flipped your thinking and had to go out and seek information, for them to hear that and think that's a possibility for them, like that pathways idea.
yeah,
Is it
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, any which way, yeah, I'd love to come and have a yarn and do those
wonderful?
kind of things.
So
Share
based
the
in
yeah.
Perth, Zoom conversations is fine. Do you also obviously travel up to the Kimberley often? And you were involved over in Queensland. So do you still do much travel that way if people want to hook up and get you involved?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So my film company is based in Sydney.
Yeah.
And so I travel back and forth. We'll be doing a lot of Comic Cons again this year.
Yeah.
So that both in Brisbane, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, ACT, those kind of areas. So yeah, any which way. And if I'm happy to fly and travel.
Wonderful.
The year is looking just calendar, just booking stuff into my calendar,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that it's all there from facilitation. But I would much
And
rather at
film,
this
do
point.
you do film creating with students as well? I know you're moving away from working with young people, but
Yeah.
do you do creation with young people?
Oh, well, like, that's something that definitely be flexible in doing.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff, so in the film side of stuff, I create the concept, the idea, write the
Yes.
scripts, do all that kind of stuff, and then I'm moving into directing this year as well. So I'm hoping, yeah, wherever, because one of the things is capacity building, and so we need to build that capacity and representation within the industry. And so any which way we can, yeah, that'd be awesome.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for making the time, Scott. And sorry to rush
Yeah,
off
no,
on you because I feel like I could talk all day, but I imagine you've got to go help
yeah.
the flood effort and spend time with family too. So thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Scott is co-founder of Ice Cream Productions, which they're hoping to become a beacon for change in an industry that has the power to alter the perspectives and views of Aboriginal people. They want to integrate storytelling and provide a transfer of knowledge and reinstate control over First Nations narrative. So Benny and Scott are both highly involved and highly productive in their enterprises around changing the narrative around First Nations culture and people and stereotypes. Scott has also written many things, including a First Nations picture book called Little Bullock and a comic series called Dark Heart. And I think they're up to the second in that series so far. Both well worth having in your school libraries, both well worth inviting your students to read, to see their faces and their stories and experiences represented in text. Scott's also available for author talks, as he said, workshops, teacher PD, and cultural awareness training. So reach out to him. He can travel, do Zoom, and he's active in Sydney, Brisbane, the Kimberleys, and Perth, but has travel and reasons to go abroad, or not abroad, interstate, as he said before. So make sure you reach out to him and see if there's something that you can work towards with your students as far as role model, pathways, or indeed better ways to interact and support your students. Each podcast episode, we also try and highlight or spotlight or do a shout out for amazing businesses, organisations, groups, and services that are working in remote communities. This could be run or owned by First Nations people, or services that regularly are committed to going into remote communities and listening and working with First Nations people. So here is our shout out and spotlight for this episode. So it makes sense for this episode to focus on FISH as the initiative to follow. So FISH is the Foundation for Indigenous Sustainable Health. FISH is developing a range of initiatives to meet their vision for all First Nations people to be confident, connected, and healthy. These projects provide equal opportunities for education, training, employment, and life choices. They are either run directly by FISH or in partnership with others. As they do this, First Nations people are giving opportunities in society to feel valued, positive, healing, and leading contributors to community, and to connect with people to care for each other and care for country. They aim to break the cycle of generational trauma, poverty, and engagement in the justice system. They want First Nations people to play a leading role in the development of projects and initiatives. And that's what they do. They actively work with a broad cross-section of community to achieve positive outcomes. Part of that is FISH Publishing, FISH Films, the BIN Art Initiative, art exhibitions, art therapy, education and training through the Books for All program, the Aboriginal Scholarship Initiative, the Traditional Food and Bush Skills program. By creating and selling numerous resources that empower educators to promote reconciliation and deepen students' knowledge and understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, cultures, and perspectives, as highlighted in the Australian curriculum. FISH are also involved in housing. They've created the Super Abode Earth House as a model for Indigenous housing. They support Aboriginal home ownership. They have a community co-design construction idea. They travel, including up to near Footscray Crossing, to have input into the design of sustainable housing. And they completed a demonstration home in 2014 in consultation with Landcorp and the Summit Homes Group to create a sustainable home example. FISH also works in the justice space with a justice diversion project, rehabilitation and cultural healing and awareness program. FISH is also involved in student cultural days, professional development and cultural competency through organisations and schools. They also believe in the importance of healthy people and healthy land. So they do that through a market garden project, fire and land management, and conservation. And finally, FISH has their social enterprise project. So they've got a storefront in Perth selling First Nations products and books and resources to help you in your classroom as well. So make sure you check out their website so you can access all the deadly programs, resources and suggestions that you'll find on there. And that's who Scott is going down to work with and alongside, who also stock his book and comics. You've been listening to the Remote Teacher Podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things remote outback teaching. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, join our email list and our Facebook group, Teachers in Remote Communities, Past, Present and Future. Any important links mentioned or businesses or organisations to support your remote teaching that our guest has mentioned today will be in the show notes. So make sure you have a look at them to find out more. And a reminder again that this podcast can be downloaded so you can access it when you do not have internet coverage or reception. So you can listen to it on your long drives between communities in the outback. Thank you for listening. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode of The Remote Teacher.